everybody. This is Bob McGinley. A few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of talking to Derek Argobright, who is the former CTO of Tickets.com, which is a company of Major League Baseball. It was a great discussion. If you're a technology buff at all and a sports fan, I think you'll get a lot out of it. We talk about everything from converting Major League Baseball over from paper tickets to electronic tickets and the implications of doing that. Some of the other stuff that he went through during his time in that role, which I think you'll find pretty compelling. And we get into some other topics around AI and some of the things going on around technology today. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Great to have you on. Great to catch up again. It's been a while since we talked. Knowing that you're, coming out of a recent position with Major League Baseball, and last night being the end of the World Series, we were just talking a bit ago. I asked you if you got to see a little bit of the game. You said you did, but you were off in the city at a little get together. So why don't you tell me about where you were and what you were doing?
Yeah. So last night I was invited to a networking event. I've been talking to a lot of different people in the technology space, and in a roundabout way. How about that? That's better. I ended up getting an invite to a networking event for a group called SIM. I'd never heard of them before. It stands for Society of Information Management, and they have a national chapter. They have a local chapters. I guess there's one here in New Jersey. The one that I went to last night was in New York City. It's called SIM NYC, and it was at 22 Vanderbilt. Really beautiful space that they had rented. Great venue, a great topic. We were talking, there's a round table about cybersecurity professionals in sports. And it was led by the CISO from the Crafts Group. So, it's interesting. I didn't realize how large of a business Bob Kraft actually had. Everybody knows him for the New England Patriots, but he has many different properties that he is running beyond sports. And so the CISO talked a bit about that and how he approaches all of the properties in a very rationalized way, in a very strict manner in terms of how he demands of his internal departments and external vendors and partners the same security controls across all those properties, so that he understands on a monthly basis, what his security risks are. And it was quite an interesting discussion that I listened for the most part, but it was an interesting discussion to hear all of the panelists talk about their different approaches to cybersecurity, and how they were really, I think, managing the expectations of the various stakeholders who have differing or different opinions or interests in cybersecurity. And so that was quite interesting. To scoop it up almost immediately from actual fans purchasing those tickets. And one of the reasons that they did is because they knew that they could create an arbitrage scenario out on the secondary market. And that differential was enough to begin to actually fund a lot of their nefarious operations. And wow. So we saw, whether I'm not going to name countries or get into sort of geopolitical types of names and things of that nature, but there were all kinds of nation states that were after the ticketing inventory, and so we worked with our third-party partners, our CDNs, in order to mitigate a lot of that traffic, and worked with the club itself to understand when they would potentially release inventory, so we'd have better eyeballs on the systems, and so to thwart those attacks and help our partners understand when we might see additional traffic.
Interesting. Yeah, I would think you'd be able to throttle the release of the tickets too, right? Just to you don't just release them all at once so that they can be arbitrage like that.
Well, we don't. They don't typically. So we don't do any. The thing of it is the way it worked was we were a SaaS platform, and so the release of that inventory was in the hands entirely of the organization that contracted our services, and so
Yeah.
we had we all had a common interest in keeping the system stable, available and performant. But they have their business to run, and so we always coordinated very closely together. But I mean, they have their business to run, and they need to be able to get the maximum dollars for their tickets as well. And it's interesting too. Some really were interested in having fans actually gain access to those tickets. Others didn't care, and just if it's sold, it's sold.
Yeah. Yeah. Funny. So how long were you at tickets.com? Tell me a little bit about your career there and how you made it to CTO.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I dropped in, and I say that, and it's almost like I was parachuted in 2010. And again, it seems like it was right around this time, a little bit before and earlier in the postseason. I recall it very vividly. Look, it's one of those things that you just don't ever forget. The Twins had been down for over 48 hours. They were unable to sell postseason tickets for 48 hours. They had not been in the postseason for I'm going to guess, I don't remember the exact time frame, but for the purposes of this conversation, I'll call it a decade. It seemed like that to them in any case. And when you can't sell tickets for 48 hours, it seems like an eternity. And so it was really quite a situation. And my boss, who was the CTO of Major League Baseball Advanced Media, calls me into his office and says, "We have a serious issue. I need you to go out to Costa Mesa tonight and start to unwind and unravel what is going on there and get the Twins back up and selling postseason tickets." So I literally bought a ticket. I think it was like 2:00 in the afternoon, and was on a flight at 4:00 that day to Costa Mesa to land at like 7 p.m. to work with the teams that I'd never met before in Costa Mesa in the corporate office to try and get the Twins back up and running. And I think by about, I'm going to guess it was probably like 4 a.m. Pacific time at that point that we finally got them up and running and working again. And it was my first sort of step into the tickets.com world. And that was, I guess, what's the phrase? Something by fire. I don't know what the phrase is, but
Trial by fire.
Trial by fire. That's it. Thank you, Bob. Trial by fire. So I was, just thrown into the fire and told, figure it out. And so, or thrown into the deep end and figure it out. I did. What we came to learn very quickly was that the Twins and the Royals have been migrated onto this new B2B flagship that they called ProVenue. And it was a SaaS platform, and it had been launched for the Vancouver Olympics. And it did okay for the Vancouver Olympics, but it had its underlying issues. And so much so that the Twins and the Royals had actually sent a breach letter to baseball saying, if you don't fix the system, we're going to leave tickets.com and we're going to go to Ticketmaster. So that's how at that point it was like, okay, well, we have some serious underlying issues here that need to be resolved. So I stayed on and started to unpack many of the existing issues that were, just really waylaying the system, and I think calling into question whether or not it was actually a viable platform moving forward, to be honest with you. And so it was me, another individual that stayed on and really took the reins in terms of how to really figure out, okay, is this a viable system? If it is a viable system, what needs to change? What's the underlying architecture? what's the foundation need to be in order for it to actually survive and be a reliable, performant, available system that can really power ticketing into the future. What do the teams need to look like, and how do we go about enacting that change and that change management in a way that's expeditious, so that we can stave off the wolves at the door, basically saying you either. I mean, at the same time, just to kind of give a little bit more context, NASCAR. It's now NASCAR, but it was ISC, International Speedway Corporation, back in the day, before it became NASCAR, had already said, we're firing you. This was happening at the same time. That's how bad things were. They're like, you sold us a bill of goods. We don't want your system anymore. We're leaving. And so
they were going
to go back onto their own system that they had built previously. And so that's how fast things were crumbling. And so there was a frenzy and an urgency around whether or not we could actually enact enough change fast enough to overcome this tidal wave of departures that were occurring, and whether or not we could salvage this B2B platform. And we worked tirelessly. I know. When I say it was a frenzy, I would get on a plane on Sunday nights or Monday morning and fly out to Costa Mesa, and then come back on a red eye on Thursday night. And I did that for a year straight. That was my commute. That was my commute. And so I was a lot younger then. A lot younger then. Probably a lot dumber. I guess I was a lot dumber then too, because I did that. But to be honest with you, that kind of chutzpah, or just blind dedication, was, I think, what really propelled me to instantiate myself, endear myself to the folks in Costa Mesa, that allowed me to establish a name that I was someone to rely upon, and that even as a sounding board. And I don't know that I was ever the technologist that they looked up to, but I was the leader from baseball that came in and established processes and transition plans, and was able to provide breathing room to create monitoring and observability and a better understanding of the underpinnings of the application, so that we could make better decisions from a foundational perspective, and things of that nature, so that we really could begin to unpack and unwind some of the early decisions of how this B2B was launched, and begin to stabilize it for the longer term.
What did you make any drastic architectural changes? Was there, platform changes? How did you scale and deal with all the? Sounds like there were some performance issues along with usability and some other things. So, what was the major factor in turning it around?
Well, as the main thing, and I remember this because this we did back at baseball. And there was a guy named Matt Konopensky, who was one of the systems engineers that one of the guys I was working with, he brought in. He was a buddy of his. I loved Matt. And, Matt had a saying, and I'm not going to say it on here because he cursed during it, but he was like, bills will make you do some crazy, and then you can, fill in your own blank there. But Matt came up with a novel approach, which, I was like, this is going to be great, because what we were trying to do was really understand what was happening in the JVM. The B2B was built in Java, and there wasn't a lot of observability and insight into what was actually occurring in the JVM. And so one of the things that Matt came up with is every time we tried to pull a heap out of when garbage collection, when it went into garbage collection, didn't come out of garbage collection, and it's running full GCs, and the system's not, the system isn't responding.
Yeah.
We're we're like, what's happening? And everybody's like, I don't know. All the engineers are like, I don't know. I go, well, that's not good enough. We need to understand what's going on. And so Matt was like, well, let's not try and pull a heap dump. I go, okay, well, what should we do? And Matt's like, well, let's take a core dump from the kernel. Oh, okay. Well, that sounds good. And then what we can do from the core dump is we'll extract the heap from the core, and then we can actually analyze the heap to find out what's going on. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, let's try it. Let's try it in UAT, and let's run a process that we know will run away, and see if it actually works. And it did. And so we actually were able to do that. We were able to analyze the heap, and then we understood exactly what was going on. And what was going on is the engineering team, I don't think there was nothing malicious behind it. They chose a technology called Hibernate.
Yeah.
So, to be honest with you, today I don't know how much Hibernate is used. It's probably not used at all.
It's still out there, yeah.
It's still out there. I'm not sure that it's very prevalent, though, right?
No, I think everyone realized that, it's better to do a bunch of left outer joins than to break all that.
Well, that's that. So when we found out, when we kind of unpacked what Hibernate was doing in pulling back this entire graph model and overloading the JVM with its graph model, it became very apparent that, okay, you guys chose efficiency and expediency, in terms of how the model, the objects were pulled back into the JVM to be able to do the work that you needed to do in order to respond to the user's request. Great, understood that. But what you're doing is you're pulling back way too much information. There's not enough memory in the entire world to actually sustain what you're doing. So let's start to unpack that and unravel that and go to native JDBC calls with, straight SQL. We're going to be in a much better spot. And so with that insight, it became, okay, well, now we need to be able to provide a glide path for the engineering team to be able to come up to be better, I would say, database engineers and SQL writers, so that they can, leverage, the native JDBC calls better and make the application more performant. That was it. Once we understood that, we were able to stabilize the platform pretty quickly, but the actual performance gains from the native JDBC re-architecture was about 1.5 years in the making. And so by 12, we were on a path where the B2B was actually very stable, and we actually were able to mature the feature set so much so that we were able to work with the executive team to create a strategy forward that allowed us to penetrate verticals that were previously unattainable. And what I mean by that is, ProVenue was originally built for enterprise sports venues.
Yeah. But
Bob, there's only so many enterprise sports venues in the world, right? So how do you, and by the way, of those enterprise sports venues, there's only so many baseball enterprise sports venues. And if you really think about it, there's not many sports leagues that are going to want to go into business with baseball, because that means they're sharing their data with baseball. So that created all sorts of challenges from a business perspective on the tickets.com side. And so one of the things that I started talking about with the head of product and the head of engineering for ProVenue was, what happens if we actually start to really tighten the security and permissions around the data inside of ProVenue and create a very, very secure multi-organizational model within ProVenue, and allow for different tenants to live in those organizations and migrate them into the same instance so that we don't have to provision new hardware. We don't have to provision new licensing. We don't have to provision really anything. All we're doing is the work to migrate them over. And at that point, I worked with the finance team, my VP of infrastructure, and we created a business model, a cost model that turned into a business model that allowed us to really penetrate markets that were previously unavailable. Because again, this was built for the enterprise sports. And so now, because we were able to create a data security model that allowed us to create this multi-organizational model, at that point now we're able to like slim this down to go to a 500-person theater. So now it's crazy. It's like we're now selling into the Naples Theater down in Florida, which is like this little small theater. And by the way, the margin on that is crazy great because they're doing a ton of shows. We're not provisioning any hardware or any net new licenses. And that's actually, I wouldn't say it's more profitable than a baseball club, but you kind of get the gist of it. That I mean, we're not. There's no real outlay of net new expenses to bring on a Naples theater, and it really opened the doors to create a very strong business model and revenue model for tickets.com.
Yeah, that's really cool. So is it a multi-tenant model then, to where you're segmenting them at the database level and just basically running everyone through the same set of code? Or you said it wasn't an impact on the infrastructure, so you're not spinning off of new instances of the app, right? You're just
it was interesting. There was isolation at the database layer and at the application layer. So it was both. And we didn't have to, we had multi-organizational instances and we had enterprise instances. And so it depended on, we looked at, what's your selling capacity ultimately. And so whether you fit into a multi-organizational model or you fit into an enterprise model. And I think there was one other, but I don't recall what it is off the top of my head, but you get the gist is, how many internet tickets we went off of, how many tickets are you going to sell on the internet is really what it came down to. And then from there, the model really dictated, do you go into an existing instance? Do you go into maybe a not as crowded instance, but a more shared instance, or do you go into your own instance of ProVenue?
Yeah, because the technology's really kind of come, full circle, right? To the point where you can, and I don't know how the venues do it, but like they're able to change the map of the whole, ticket layout, and move the stage out further or have a pit in a certain section. So it's like they can totally customize the layout and where the seats are for any particular show, which to me is just, is really kind of
it's
crazy.
Wild. It's in our system, I forget, we had like a master event and sort of a master seating configuration, and that was all possible seats ever. And then there were venue configurations for, whether it was maybe it was as a concert, or it was a baseball game, or it was a wedding. And so you had different venue configurations in that master configuration that existed. And so I want to go back and I guess answer the question, because I think that it's kind of important. And so when you take the journey, how did I get to be CTO? When you take that journey of stabilizing ProVenue, creating all the while the B2C, we're trying to create we're working and working through testing and performance testing and stress testing the B2C to be able to handle concerts better at the same time. And while we're doing all of this work on the B2B, we're launching a centralized data warehouse for the clubs and all of non-baseball. And we're hardening the data security to create this multi-organizational model. So
Right.
by 14, we're now for the first time ever a profitable company. We win the Dodgers away from Ticketmaster.
Yeah.
I was part of the pitch team that sat in front of the executives over there to help win the deal. And it's interesting because I sat in front of Seth Blumen, who I still think is with the Dodgers today, and he kind of challenged me at the time. He's like, why should we go with you? I've been asking from Ticketmaster for 7 years now to have them produce a confirmation email receipt from the system, and they can't do it. Is that something you guys can do? And I said to Seth, I believe I said, it's like, Seth, here's what we're going to do. We're going to deliver it to you if you come onto the system, I'm going to deliver it to you within 6 months. We're going to have it up and running for you, and you're going to love it. You're going to sign off on it. And if you don't, we're going to migrate you back to Ticketmaster on our own dime. We'll tear up your contract. That's how sure I am that we can get this done, and then you guys are going to be happy. And they've been on the system ever since.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, and so we turned the corner in terms of profitability. We turned the corner in terms of the sort of business strategy and the business model. We at that point had retired 2 or 3 of the legacy ticketing systems. There were 5, 2 or 3 of the legacy ticketing systems that existed. So all of this is going on. I mean, we're talking about frenzied work, and we're transitioning and trying to upskill and reskill existing talent within the pool to come over onto B2B or B2C platforms, because that's the path forward for us. And it was a fun time, and that's when I was made CTO of Tickets.com, and it was I looked at that point. I think one of the baseball executives turned to me and he said, we were talking. He's like, well, you're no longer fixing. You're going to have to figure out what you're going to build. I'm like, okay.
Finally. And what did you build?
Oh, wow. It's interesting. So we did a lot of innovative things, and one of the ones that I'm most proud of. You're met with all kinds of different challenges as a technologist and as a chief technology officer, particularly as a chief technology officer. I think that you're always being pulled in many different directions by the business. And one day, my boss, the CEO, calls me in and is like, "Okay, we're going to meet with Bob." Bob Bowman was what he meant was Bob Bowman, the CEO of Major League Baseball Advanced Media. And Bob laid out a path and a plan that we were going to build a secondary market site for the Boston Red Sox. I said, okay, that's interesting. And it just came out of the blue. It's like, okay, wow, all right, we're building a secondary market site. Great. And so I started to think about how we would go about doing that, and whether or not we could. Tickets.com had a history of supporting a secondary market functionality, but it was so old and archaic. I wasn't sure that it would actually could dust it off and then and reinvigorate it. And
so what do you mean by secondary market?
Yeah, great question. That's I guess shouldn't assume that everybody knows what a secondary market site is.
I think of like T-shirts and gloves and hats and stuff, but I'm guessing that's
well, and that's more merch. When you talk about secondary market, think about StubHub, SeatGeek.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so you're basically taking your primary inventory and now you are posting it on the secondary market because you can't go to the game, or maybe you just want to make more money because you decided that that's how you're going to pay for your season tickets, or whatever the reason happens to be. And so, I mean, the secondary market business in baseball, because they sell so many tickets. I mean, literally they're selling more than 60 million tickets a year across all clubs. So that's just primary tickets. And so the secondary market is it's not almost as big, but it's a pretty significant part of ticket sales in baseball, and it's a pretty significant part of the revenue model across all baseball clubs. And so it was no small ask when you're talking about the Boston Red Sox. While they have a small venue, their actual business is fairly significant and large, and their brand is obviously off the charts. I mean, you can go across the world and people will know who the Boston Red Sox are. And Fenway Sports Group. I mean, Fenway Sports Group, if you don't know, not only do they own the Boston Red Sox, but they also own Liverpool, and they have other properties as well. And so I was tasked now with trying to figure out, how am I going to build out this secondary market site? And I think the most interesting part of building out the site wasn't, how we're going to staff it, because now it's like I need additional resources because we have our roadmap, and now we have this huge project dropped in our lap.
Yeah.
That was going to be that was part of the challenge, but that wasn't the most, I would say, the most interesting part of the challenge. It wasn't the timeline or the deadline, which was also just, I think we ended up having, I don't quite recall, but my intuition tells me that it was somewhere that in the 4 to 6 month range that we had to stand up a full secondary market site. The most interesting part was when we landed the Dodgers. I'm going to go back to that moment. We also launched digital ticketing for them. And what I mean by digital ticketing is the ability to actually access your ticket on your mobile device. And you can see that ticket, you can manage that ticket, you can use that ticket to actually enter the venue. And that was our first foray in 2014 to really create a mobile first journey for fans. And so, I think this is around 15 or 16, we were now tasked with this secondary market site. And the same person, this all comes full circle. The same person who asked me, "What are you going to build?" Came to me and said, "So I assume you're just going to extend out the current ProVenue Online customer journey." And the current, just to kind of give some context, that customer journey, that B2C journey, was built in a very old technology, JSP, desktop centric flow. And I turned to him and I said, "No, we're actually going to build it mobile first." And that was such a critical decision. I can't even tell you, because I was relying on a very small burgeoning team within our engineering team that I was now empowering to go out and build a mobile first secondary market customer journey that was going to work across devices, and in lieu of the traditional B2C engineering team that was building out all of these customer journeys in Java. And I needed the buy-in from that team, and I needed the acceleration of the learning from the new team, and I needed them both to work together. And there was a little bit of I think heartburn and emotional heartache on the traditional, what I will call the traditional B2C engineering team, but they finally got it. And I talked through with them the rationale, because the one engineering leader, he came to me and said, "Well, we could do this. We could make this mobile friendly within the confines of what he was doing." And I never said, "No, you can't." But in the back of my mind, I was thinking to myself, no matter how well you think you could actually make it mobile friendly, it would never be mobile first. Right. And so mobile friendly does not equal mobile first. And so that was a seminal moment for us, because what ended up happening, from that was when we launched in February. It was the end of February. I think I want to say either 16 or 17. I don't remember the actual dates. It launched flawlessly. because I remember like we went up and we were in front of the president of the Boston Red Sox, Sam Kennedy, and we put on a demo, and we're all shaking in our boots because we knew how much more work there was to do. We had a very compressed, like we're weeks away, but we knew that we were going to be working around the clock to get all of this together. But
Yeah.
we needed to put on a really good demo, and even on the big screen, the jumbotron in Fenway Park, because we're at Fenway Park, we're up there, in Boston, and on the jumbotron, Naomi, who's one of the senior ticketing operations folks for the Boston Red Sox, I love her to death. She has on the jumbotron, "This better be good." Like, what?
So I'm running all this through my head, right? Because you got the scanners, so they all have to resolve and get the data somehow locally, right? So, and then you've got all these secondary markets, so they're all pulling off of some API that you guys have developed.
Yep.
So I can go outside of the stadium, buy a ticket in that secondary market, and then 3 minutes later be going through the door to get that QR code or barcode scanned and have that loop made all the way through.
Oh, absolutely. So that, and Bob, what's interesting about that is that was the easiest part of all of this. I mean,
Really?
we already had in place an event-driven technology, a JMS message that allowed for events of tickets being sold, primary, secondary, returned, refunded, exchanged, to be updated in our access control system, so that there were let me put it this way before I guess I don't want to say confuse anybody, but make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah.
There were never any issues of people getting into parks that shouldn't have been in the park.
Right.
That didn't exist. And so those that were supposed to be in the park got into the park, and we validated those tickets, and we validated those tickets well. And there were no, this primary ticket's valid, scanned in. This secondary market ticket is for the same seat, it's valid. If anything, any of the issues that we had, it was somebody had a valid ticket with the wrong section, row, and seat from a third party that was not an official ticketing provider from us, and those were a lot of the issues that we ended up facing. But it was never either with like StubHub selling tickets and for the same seat or anything of that nature. And so all of that happened instantaneously as the status of the ticket changed. Right. And so that was the easiest part. But launching this, when we're sitting there like, okay, this better be good, and that's on the jumbotron, and we launched this. That first year when we launched that secondary market, we took 30% away from StubHub.
Really?
And yeah, and a lot of it had to do with real, I think, strong business incentives on the Boston Red Sox part, but it also had to do with the fact that if the technology didn't work, people weren't going to use it, no matter what the business incentives were. And so ultimately, one of the things that Naomi said was that they were able to resolve all of the issues that occurred, with patrons, not with the technology, from the direct integration to the secondary market site from our B2B platform, instead of having to call StubHub or us to try and, figure things out. They were able to do it all, and they were extremely happy about that. And so when baseball inked the 5-year deal with StubHub in 2018, I think it was, where StubHub was now to become again the official secondary market site of Major League Baseball, we understood that what our role in this was to really be a lever in the negotiations for baseball, which was fine, because what we ended up doing is we pivoted the work that we did on the secondary market to create a new customer journey for the primary market. And we reused everything that we did to be able to make that happen. And I think that's one of the things that I've done. If I have to pat myself on the back, it's like, it's really kind of creating building blocks along the way to sort of transition and reuse things that have evolved in the ecosystem and leverage them to the hilt.
Yeah, I kind of have done that myself too, right? Just I always keep those little widgets around in case I need them for the next cool thing, right?
Absolutely.
So let's go back a little bit. Tell me a little. I always like to find out how people got into technology and what was it that kind of flipped the switch for you. So when, because you've obviously got, deep technical skills. You've also got the business side of the house that you're going in with, the Los Angeles Dodgers senior executive team to pitch them on a product that you're developing. So when did the light shine for you that I was going to be a techie the rest of my life?
Oh boy. I'm here now, and I can't deny that I am a techie. I call into question every day, whether or not I'm actually a true techie or not. But I guess I am, Bob. And I don't know if everybody else does that, but
it's the imposter syndrome. Yes.
What's that?
It's called the imposter syndrome, right? So
yeah, sure. I guess I look at it and I look out over the landscape of tech, and it's so broad and vast, and you say to yourself, will you ever really know enough? And so I think the answer to that is obviously no. You'll never know enough. But when did I get my start? I go back to 2005. I joined Major League Baseball Advanced Media. I was done with my previous career that I didn't want to do anymore. Yeah. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to get paid watching baseball. And so I applied to Major League Baseball Advanced Media. They were hiring, and they were hiring for part-timers to come in and do data entry and work from like 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., taking phone calls, half inning by half inning from the minor leagues, and really, just inputting it into the system in this proprietary coding language that they had developed with some of their engineers and things. And I was like, this is going to be great because I'm going to get paid to watch baseball. This is fantastic. I love baseball. I literally watch the Yankees every night, and I was like, I'm going to watch the Yankees and I'm going to get paid. What's better? And so that's how I got into baseball. Yeah. Within a month, the team over there liked me a lot. Sandy Zen, who I still talk to today, Chris Lentini, who was his boss. They were like, let's bring Argo. They called me Argo back then. Argo, let's bring Argo on. Let's offer him a full-time gig. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Let's do this. And so I was working nights. I was managing the people that I once was. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest with you, I was frustrated. I was very, very frustrated because I guess this has been a theme. The technology, I was fine with the technology when I used it, but what I found is that others didn't understand how to use. Not that they didn't understand how to use the technology, but they get themselves into situations where the technology didn't work as advertised, right. And so it was interrupting my time to actually watch baseball because I was having to go over and help them troubleshoot, and I was like, oh man, this is not good. So. I was just getting really frustrated, and I would wake up then around like 9-10 o'clock in the morning after being up to like 3 or 4 a.m. and I'd get on AOL Instant Messenger. I'd have air logs saved. I learned how to tail logs in the evenings and really understand what was happening, from the application logs that were generated. I'd save these. And then I go online and start to Google and understand what was happening in the in the application. And then I'd instant message some of the engineers and the developers and talk to them about what was going on and talk about changes that potentially could be made, and then testing those changes. And to answer your question very directly, that's how I got my start in tech. I really just started digging in because I was frustrated that my baseball watching time was being interrupted, and I was tired of it. And I just started digging in and getting deeper and deeper. And Bob, you probably know this yourself. Once you start to go down this rabbit hole doesn't end.
Yep.
Go ahead.
For me, I was, I would find myself in bookstores, sitting in the back of the store, not really looking for a book to buy, trying to figure out how I could get through the coding challenge I had that day, and if there was, some way around it, right? And this is where I got into like the Java native stuff and, writing DLLs that I could hook into Java to get into certain parts of the Windows operating system. And like you said, I just spiraled from there, right? Then I started getting into assembly and all kinds of other crazy stuff, and it just, I just got lost in all of it, and then I got to the point where I would wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and just have to go write some code because I would figure stuff out in my off time. Like my brain was always just kind of cycling through, and that's kind of when it struck me. It's like, this is what I was meant to do, So similar thing. I wasn't watching that much baseball, but I was skiing at the time, so similar.
Nice. Yeah, it's because if you have an inquisitive, so there's a couple of things. If you have an inquisitive mind, and obviously you do, because you just can't let things go. Like you have to like follow the trail, and if you follow the trail, you'll find that in that trail there's probably about 5 to 1,000 different conditions that can occur where you can actually go down and actually you discover new and different and interesting things. Yeah. And at least that was for me. And then on top of that, to be honest with you, Bob, not being classically trained in computer science or, sort of technology, I've always had a chip on my shoulder, but I've never let it get in the way in terms of asking what I would call the dumb question, or being the dumb guy. And so even to this day, I ask questions that I feel like I should know, but I don't care because I want to know. It doesn't matter to me that people think that I should know. I just still ask the question because to me, it's more important that I've asked that question and I get back that knowledge than it is any embarrassment that would necessarily come along for the ride with that by asking that question.
Yeah, I'm the same way. That's kind of the no fear approach to this kind of business, right? Just I've gotten over that hump of being afraid of what other people think. So it's if I got a problem to solve, I'm going to do whatever I can to go and solve it. And like we were just saying, my brain doesn't sleep when there's something egging at me. So right now I'm playing with AWS Bedrock and trying to train LLMs to do some of the work we needed to do. And it's so frustrating. But so I'm right back. I'm always in it, right? It's like it just sucks me back in. So you never really get away from it. So what is it that you're kind of focused on now that you're kind of out of baseball, you're looking for, the next great thing to go do in your career? Where do you think you're headed?
It's appreciate that, and thanks for that question. It's interesting. I think that when my role was eliminated back in July, the actual first thing that I did was to begin to learn Python, and I had a very short period of time where I was coding at Major League Baseball Advanced Media. And then once I actually moved into tickets.com, I didn't code at all. There was just, you go back to the previous, for those, that listen to and watch this, if you listen to that frenzied part, there was no time to actually code. It was organizing and leading and change and, interacting and all kinds. There was no hands-on keyboard. There was simply like, let's figure out the direction, the focus, and deliver. And so after I was laid off, I started in on Python, I thought it would be a great. I had already had some significant study in artificial intelligence and machine learning that I'd done during COVID, and continued on. It continued on through through up until the time of my departure, and so I thought Python was a natural extension of that learning. And so today I'm working, as a consultant with a media and entertainment company. Can't say who they are, but what I've done is I've built them a RAG application that they're using as a research assistant. And
Nice.
Today, primarily, it does search. They have begun to actually start to look at it from a generative perspective, and because they have decades and decades and decades and decades of transcripts. And so the material is very rich, and they've started to play around with how they can create content as opposed to just actually do research from that content. Cool. And so I've gotten to answer I've really dove into the whole generative AI development and started begin. Well, I wouldn't say that I'm an expert Python coder by any stretch of the imagination, given the emergence of copilots and coding assistants, and even just what the large language models can do. It's really, I think, accelerated what I'm capable of doing from a coding perspective, what I'm capable of delivering. And it's been fun to really dive in and begin to sort of create agents, agents that access traditional SQL databases, agents that can decide that we're going to access the SQL database and the vector store and synthesize those responses together, or maybe even call out to the web to get some information from the web. So it's really I love what I'm doing right now, and I'd love to take that to the next level. To be honest with you.
That's great. Yeah, I'm enjoying it too, and I'm playing at that same level, right? Just trying to load some unstructured data, but then have some structured data that's still available. So you got relational structures and document level structures, and you got images, you got all this crazy stuff, and then trying to figure out how you get that thing to navigate between all of it is really just, it's a whole nother problem area to go play around with and try to resolve. So yeah,
it's really interesting. I mean, creating that standardization layer, that metadata layer, to really have some type of structure out of that unstructured data, but have that unstructured data available, because that's where the meat and potatoes are. It's and then have the LLM and the agent to be able to make the right decisions, against which data is set to go, or both. It's quite the puzzle, and it's fun.
Yeah, it really is. Well, the thing I'm running into is making it so that it's repeatable, right? So we're playing around with some stuff, but if you go and ask it the same question 5 or 6 times, it'll answer the exact same way for 5 times, and number 6, it'll totally change the response. So it's like, how do you get it to trust its own answers in that conversational prompt engagement? And it's
it's interesting you say that, because I've heard arguments, or I've seen arguments, where some of that could be considered a feature versus a bug.
Yeah.
And whether I guess it depends on the use case that you're developing for. But I've seen blogs and posts that I've read where it's like, we should embrace the fact that it's not deterministic, and that it's ultimately there's going to be changes. And I was talking to a partner and colleague of mine, and I said to him, I go, well, if we're going to use a third party LLM and we're not going to bring this in house, then we're relying on their model, and we are at the whims of their changes in terms of how that model behaves. And so determinism is not going to be something that is in the cards necessarily for us, because that model can change underneath us, regardless of whether it's the same, we're using the same model or not. They're constantly updating that model until they tell me that it's, been sunset or end of life.
Right.
And so if I'm certain that, like I'm using OpenAI and I'm using the 4.0 mini model, it's not a stagnant, sort of, non, there are changes. I'm certain that OpenAI is making changes to that model all the time, and updating it. And so the responses from that model are going to change as well when you call that model.
Yeah. Are you using it on Azure right now?
So the application that I built is sitting on OCI, and we did that because, and honestly, the OCI gives you some decent credits for free to spin up applications, and that we leverage that. And so I've used Llama Index as a data integration framework to call out to OpenAI. What's interesting about that is that I'm now using some Llama Index and some of my own native Python code to do a lot of the calls. And so I've gotten better over time in understanding how I want the application to behave by using my own native Python skills versus having to use that abstraction layer of Llama Index. It's just an evolving learning process, as you well know.
Are you using an automation platform at all, like N8N or anything like that? No? Yeah. No. Interesting. Well, cool. Good stuff. So anything else you want to share with our illustrious audience today? Anything that you're kind of delving into on the side? What was the latest book that you read around technology? Anything good?
What's interesting? I actually, believe it or not, I probably read more blogs and sort of white papers than I do technology books. I'm trying to think, what's that?
You're a total nerd.
Yeah, well, it's just like the last technology book that I don't remember the last technology book that I read. I can tell you the last book that I read, and the last book that I read was given to me by my my physical therapist. I was, just a quick story. When I was right after I was let go, I went and played tennis with my nephew, and this was during my my older brother's retirement ceremony. He retired from the Marine Corps after 22 years as a lieutenant colonel. And so we were down there, we were playing tennis, and I was coming back, and it was an intense game. I pushed off of my right foot and I tore my Achilles heel.
Oh.
I ruptured it. So I had to get surgery. This was all last year, and rehabilitate. And now I'm up and running. It's a year later and I'm up and running, and it's all good. But during that time I went to physical therapy after I got out of the boot and the cast and everything else. And my physical therapist gave me this book called All the Gallant Men. And these are the kind of books that I like to read, because they ground you in terms of, what's important and what's not important. Yeah. And it's about it's from one of the lone survivors of the USS Arizona, and just his perspective on that day, and leading up to that day, and that day, and just the men that he was with, and who they were, how they acted, and how they went about things, and why they did what they did. If you haven't if you don't know the book, you haven't read it, it's definitely worth the read.
Yeah, definitely. That one's going on the list for sure. All right, Derek, thanks again for the time. Really appreciate it. It was great chatting with you and catching up. Some great stories. I think there's a lot to learn from, your escapades and trials and tribulations there. So well done.
I appreciate the time, Bob. This has been great. Had a lot of fun.